There are cities that vanish so completely from the surface of history that only the wind remembers them, yet their influence continues to echo through the world like a vibration trapped inside stone. Samarkand was one of those cities. It sat on the spine of Asia like a watchtower between worlds. The scent of saffron drifted along its streets. Caravan bells chimed in the distance. Traders arrived coated in desert dust, their camels swaying beneath loads of silk, jade, musk, and stories. This was the world of the Sogdians, the merchant people who did not build empires yet shaped them, who had no armies yet commanded entire trade routes, who owned no kingdoms yet moved wealth across continents with a secrecy that confounded every power that tried to control them. The Sogdians were not conquerors. They were connectors. They understood the geography of desire. They understood that Rome longed for silk and that China longed for horses. They understood that India hungered for glassware and that Persia hungered for spices. They became the translators of these hungers, weaving them together into a network of exchange so vast that even emperors whispered their names with a mixture of admiration and unease. They were the veins of the Silk Road, pulsing through deserts, mountains, and hostile borders. In their hands, a bolt of silk could change the fate of a kingdom, and a rumor whispered over tea could start or stop a war. To understand their power, imagine a Sogdian caravan leaving Samarkand at dawn. The city walls glow with the rising sun. Horses stamp the earth. Camels groan beneath their cargo. The caravan master stands at the front, his robe dyed indigo, his eyes scanning the horizon with the calmness of someone who has spent more years on the road than in any home. His name might have been Nanai Vandak or Varkuman or something now lost to time. But he was the type of man whose family name appeared in Chinese imperial records one century and Roman trader diaries the next. A man whose ancestors had walked these routes long before he was born, and whose children would inherit the maps not drawn on paper, but on memory. His caravan carries silk from China, lapis from Afghanistan, sandalwood from India, and glassware from the Roman world. But what he truly carries, the substance that made the Sogdians legendary, is information. The price of grain in Antioch, the rumor of a new tax in Persia, the death of a governor, the rise of a warlord, the movement of bandits, the shortage of horses in the Tarim Basin, the shift in fashion among Roman aristocrats, the whisper that a new silk dyeing technique had been discovered in the Tang court. These threads of information were more valuable than any spies. The Sogdians learned early that profit was not in products, but in timing. Silk was nothing without knowing when China would restrict exports. Horses were nothing without knowing when the emperor in Chang'an needed mounts for his cavalry. Perfumes were nothing without knowing when a drought would strike the eastern Mediterranean and force merchants to trade luxuries for necessities. The Sogdians did not predict the future. They read the present so clearly that the future revealed itself. Their caravans moved like rivers. They rarely stayed in one place for more than a night. They crossed deserts where heat shimmered like molten glass. They climbed mountain passes where the air thinned into ice. At every outpost, they traded goods but gathered intelligence. In every caravanserai, they sat around fires listening to the conversations of strangers. They paid attention not to what people boasted about, but to what they feared. Fear was the truest currency of empires. In the Tang dynasty, the Sogdians became so indispensable that emperors carved their images on palace walls, not as nobles, but as conduits, the men who carried the pulse of the world. In the Roman Empire, they were known simply as the men from the East. They spoke Sogdian, Bactrian, Chinese, Persian, and Turkic tongues. They carried pocket-sized scrolls with coded symbols to track debts and exchanges. They created a credit system, allowing merchants to move vast amounts of wealth with nothing more than trust and ink. They mastered the art of invisibility. They did not form nations because nations were boundaries. They formed networks instead, and networks could pass through walls. The caravan master reaches Dunhuang near sunset. The air cools. Lanterns flicker along the fortified walls. Buddhist monks walk in saffron robes. The caravan enters the city with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Children count the camels. Guards inspect the cargo. The merchants move toward the market. But the caravan master does not join them. He goes instead to a quiet tea house where he meets a Chinese official whose robes shimmer with embroidered cranes. They speak in hushed voices. The official reveals that a local governor has imposed a new tariff on foreign merchants. The Sogdian listens, nods, sips his tea. He will not protest. He will not complain. Instead, he will adjust. He will raise prices in the next city. He will reroute part of the caravan through a lesser-known pass to avoid attention. He will send a coded message to another clan leader. And in doing so, he will turn a threat into an advantage. This adaptability was the essence of Sogdian power. They did not cling to fixed identities. When Buddhism dominated Central Asia, they became Buddhists. When Persia demanded Zoroastrians, they became Zoroastrians. When China preferred diplomats who spoke Confucian etiquette, they learned it. Their loyalty was not to doctrine or tribe. It was to continuity. They understood that survival required flexibility. That identity was a tool, not a prison. Their influence grew not from force, but from frequency. They passed through cities so often that they became familiar faces in unfamiliar lands. They formed marriages with local families. They built small enclaves in distant cities. And they created what might be the earliest version of a globalized mind. A worldview not tied to a single kingdom or culture, but shaped by the intersections of many. Their caravans shaped diplomacy. Their networks shaped markets. Their information shaped decisions. A Roman officer might choose a route based on a Sogdian warning. A Chinese general might move troops based on a Sogdian rumor. A Persian noble might invest in a venture based on a Sogdian prediction. They were the invisible advisors of multiple empires, the quiet architects of exchange, the merchants who bent the Silk Road without ever ruling a city. But the Sogdians paid a price for this mastery. Networks thrive in stability, and their golden age depended on the calm between empires. As soon as the world tipped toward chaos, the rise of Turkic warlords, the expansion of Arab armies, the shifting sands of Central Asian politics, the routes they once commanded became dangerous. Caravans were raided, cities were abandoned, borders hardened, and the Sogdians, who had mastered communication across cultures, suddenly found themselves caught between powers they could no longer predict. Their decline was not dramatic. It was slow, gradual, a fading of influence rather than a collapse. Yet even in their fall, the pattern remained. The micro mirrored the macro. Their fracturing networks reflected the fracturing of empires. Their fading roots reflected the fading unity of the world they once connected. But before we examine their decline, we must extract the philosophy they embodied with unparalleled clarity. The Hermetic law they lived without naming. The idea that everything vibrates, that movement is the essence of life, that information travels faster than goods, and that those who sense the vibration first shape the fortunes of those who sense it last. This is where the economic lesson begins. But first, before finance, we must understand the vibration itself. Before we descend into the financial architecture the Sogdians mastered, we must first understand the principle that breathed through their world like an unseen current. It was not written in scrolls. It was not taught in lectures. It was absorbed through movement, through wind, through the trembling of caravan bells in the stillness of the desert night. They lived according to a law the Hermetic texts would later articulate more elegantly. Nothing rests. Everything moves. Reality is vibration. Wealth is vibration. Power is vibration. And the Sogdians felt those vibrations long before anyone else. A Sogdian merchant could sense a shift in the world the way a sailor senses a change in wind. The subtlest tremor, a single rumor in a caravanserai, a whispered change in a tax code, a sudden shortage of horses, a new alliance between tribes was enough to set their minds spinning. They understood that every movement, no matter how small, carried consequences that rippled outward. This sensitivity was their greatest advantage. While most rulers waited for official proclamations, the Sogdians listened to footsteps, to accents, to hesitation in someone's voice. They knew that information does not travel in straight lines. It vibrates through society, passing from one person to another with increasing intensity until it reaches a threshold where action becomes inevitable. In their world, to feel the vibration early was to own the outcome. This sensitivity to movement shaped their lifestyle. A Sogdian merchant rarely stayed in one city for more than a few months. They believed stagnation was dangerous, not merely economically, but spiritually. Movement was creation. Stillness was decay. Their children grew up with lullabies about roads, mountains, and rivers. Their elders told stories of ancestors who followed the winds into unknown lands. Their identity was woven from travel. Even their religious beliefs adapted to each new vibration they encountered. They had no single sacred homeland. The road itself was the sanctuary. These merchants understood something that empires have always struggled to grasp. When goods stop moving, ideas stop moving. When ideas stop moving, civilizations contract. The Sogdians became the blood flow of the ancient world, pumping knowledge across continents with the same inevitability as the Nile rising and falling. They maintained not only trade, but cultural resonance. They carried Buddhist sutras into China. They introduced Persians to Chinese silk weaving techniques. They taught Turkic tribes new methods of armor making. They brought Roman glass-making secrets to the East. Their caravans were not simply economic arteries. They were carriers of frequency. To understand their influence, imagine one of their nights in the desert. The sky stretches endlessly, the stars sharp and cold against the blackness. The caravan forms a circle. Fires crackle. Tea simmers in small bronze pots. Merchants sit cross-legged in the sand, wrapped in heavy wool cloaks, speaking in soft tones. One mentions a rumor from Persia. Another shares a story from India. A third describes a new tax in Bactria. A fourth tells of a revolt in a distant province. Each fragment enters the circle like a note in an unfinished melody. Then the caravan master speaks, weaving those scattered notes into coherence. He hears what others do not. He senses the shift beneath the surface. He understands which rumor is noise and which vibration is signal. By morning, he has drawn lines in the dust. A new route, a new price, a new partnership, a new warning, a new opportunity. This ability to shape meaning from movement is the essence of the Hermetic law of vibration. Cleopatra saw correspondence in cycles. Newton saw mentalism in thought. The Sogdians saw vibration in movement. Their wealth was not built on goods, but on responsiveness. They knew that the world changes not through grand events, but through small tremors that accumulate until they reshape landscapes. The Chinese described them as merchants who knew the winds of all directions. The Persians wrote that they walked with the pulse of the world under their feet. The Arabs said that they heard whispers before they became storms. These descriptions were not poetic exaggerations. They were reflections of a truth the ancient world recognized instinctively. The Sogdians understood timing better than any army, any king, any priest. Consider their trade in horses. Chinese dynasties depended on the Central Asian horse trade to fuel their cavalry. When the Sogdians sensed a tension between warlords in the steppe, they adjusted their supply routes. When they heard of a harsh winter that would thin horse herds, they bought in advance. When they learned that the emperor planned a campaign, they increased prices in anticipation. They felt the vibration before the policy was declared, or their trade in silk. Roman aristocrats adored the fabric, but Rome tried repeatedly to ban it for being decadent. The Sogdians watched the Senate's debates, listened to the mutterings of moralists, sensed the rising resentment among traditionalists. Before Rome could enforce any ban, the Sogdians diverted shipments to border cities where silk could be purchased discreetly. They understood that laws are just spoken vibrations, destined to decay if they contradict desire. And then there was the most important vibration of all: danger. A Sogdian caravan could detect a bandit ambush days before it occurred. Not because they saw the ambush, but because they sensed the absence of noise. A deserted village, a road unusually empty, a watchtower with no smoke signal, a group of shepherds avoiding eye contact. These were not signs in the literal sense. They were missing vibrations. Silence where movement should be. Stillness where rhythm should exist. Movement and stillness, the dual forces that shaped their survival. This sensitivity became even more important when Central Asia began to change. New tribes appeared on the horizon. Old kingdoms fractured. The balance between China and Persia became unstable. The Tang dynasty entered a period of internal strain. The Sogdians felt the tremors long before they became visible. They sensed the decline of their age the way an experienced sailor senses a storm long before clouds form. The winds shifted. The caravans began to disappear. Cities that once welcomed them now demanded higher taxes or closed their gates. The vibrations that once flowed smoothly along the Silk Road became erratic, fractured. They knew the Golden Age was ending, but the Sogdians did not vanish in fear. They adapted as they always did. Some became diplomats in China. Some became financiers in Persia. Some settled in oasis cities. Some carried their knowledge into new networks formed by Arab traders. Their identity dissolved, but their influence did not. Their methods survived. Their sensitivity survived. Their philosophy survived. And it is here, at the end of their world, that the financial lesson begins to emerge with clarity sharper than any story about kings or conquerors. The Sogdians understood that wealth is not a static possession. It is a current. It flows. It shifts. It vibrates. Those who do not sense its early movements chase its late ones. Those who chase its late movements become victims of cycles they do not comprehend. The Sogdians survived by becoming attuned instruments. They became interpretive mechanisms of global vibration. They felt what others ignored. And you, living centuries later, still move in a world shaped by this same law. Before we translate their wisdom into a modern financial framework, we must observe the final vibration that sealed their fate. The one that reveals the truth modern minds most often overlook. When the end finally came for the Sogdian world, it did not arrive with a single battle or a sudden collapse. It came the way seasons change in the mountains, gradually, quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one morning, the valleys that once bloomed with wildflowers lie buried under a silence of snow. And those who had lived by movement felt that silence like a wound. The caravans grew thinner. The outposts emptied. The roads that once vibrated with the footsteps of men and animals now swallowed the sound before it could echo. The first vibration of decline was political. New powers rose along the steppe. Turkic confederations gathered strength. Warlords drew borders where Sogdians once passed freely. But even then, the merchants adapted. They rerouted their caravans, bribed new leaders, learned new customs. They adjusted to the rhythm of change. For centuries, they had survived transitions that wiped out kingdoms. They assumed they could survive these, too. The second vibration was cultural. The Tang dynasty, once a great patron of international commerce, began turning inward. Chinese court politics grew suspicious of foreigners. The An Lushan Rebellion, that devastating civil war, shook the empire so violently that the Silk Road became dangerous to travel. The Sogdians felt the tremor in their bones. They sensed the fracturing of the old world. They felt the vibrations thinning, fading, turning brittle. But they continued. They always continued. Yet there was one vibration they could not outrun, a vibration that moved too fast, cut too deeply, and reshaped the entire geography of power. It came from Arabia, not as an army at first, but as an idea. Islam spread across the deserts like wildfire, uniting tribes that had once fought endlessly. Suddenly, The old caravan routes were patrolled by a new order. The great cities of Persia fell. The old borders dissolved. And the Sogdians, who had always thrived in the spaces between empires, now found themselves caught inside a single vast empire that controlled everything from the Indus River to the Atlantic. The Silk Road did not disappear. It changed hands. The Arabs did not destroy trade. They reorganized it. They created new maritime routes that bypassed the overland paths the Sogdians had mastered for centuries. Goods that once moved by camel now traveled by ship. Spices moved faster. Silk traveled cheaper. Tea and porcelain flowed along ocean currents instead of through desert winds. The world's vibration had changed its medium. Movement had shifted. And the Sogdians, shaped by a culture built on overland travel, found themselves outside the new rhythm. Some adapted. Many did not. Their enclaves in China remained for a time, but their influence diminished. Their language slowly disappeared. Their traditions dissolved into the cultures they had once connected. They did not collapse dramatically. They eroded gently, like a shoreline pulled back by a tide that never returned. Historians often say they vanished, but that is not true. They transformed. Their spirit lived on in the Persian merchants who replaced them, in the Arab traders who adopted their credit systems, in the Indian guilds that borrowed their caravan structures, in the Chinese markets that preserved their music and dance, in the very existence of global commerce itself. The Sogdians did not die. They diffused. And in that diffusion lies the financial lesson that anchors this chapter. The Sogdians remind us that wealth does not reward the strongest. It rewards the most attuned, the most sensitive, the ones who feel the world change before the world announces it. They mastered information centuries before modern economists even conceived of the word. To them, value was not a possession. It was a vibration, a frequency that pulsed through markets, empires, and human desire. When the vibration matched their movement, they prospered. When the vibration changed faster than they could move, they dissolved. This is the essence of the Hermetic law of vibration as applied to wealth. Everything is movement. Everything is frequency. Opportunities rise not as objects, but as oscillations. Market cycles, political shifts, cultural moods, technological transitions, all vibrations. Some slow, some fast, some subtle, some thunderous. The tragedy is not that people fail to take action. It is that they take action too late, acting only when the vibration becomes loud enough for everyone else to hear it. By then, the opportunity has already been priced in. By then, fortunes have already shifted. By then, the caravan has already moved on. In your world, the Silk Road still exists. It runs through data, culture, currency, markets, supply chains, social platforms, and geopolitical tensions. Goods still travel. Knowledge still travels faster. And those who sense the earliest vibrations, before headlines, before trends, before mass awareness, shape outcomes the way the Sogdians once did. Consider how industries rise. First, there is a whisper. A small company innovates quietly. A few insiders sense the frequency. Then, the early adopters join. Then, the investors. Then, the media. By the time the vibration becomes loud, the window has closed. Consider how markets shift. A sector weakens before the drop appears on charts. A nation destabilizes years before conflict erupts. A bubble inflates long before anyone calls it one. The vibration always comes first. Consider how careers evolve. The skills that will define the next decade appear first in obscure corners. A strange new software, a new tool, a shift in consumer behavior offline. Those attuned to vibration feel the direction of movement years before job markets reflect it. And consider how wealth is built. Not by reacting, by listening, observing, sensing the quiet tremors before they become earthquakes. Like the Sogdians around their desert fires. To apply their wisdom is not to become a nomad. It is to become sensitive to the micro-movements that reveal macro-truth. It is to observe shifts in sentiment, trends in scarcity, fluctuations in demand, changes in culture. It is to understand that wealth accumulates where awareness surpasses noise, where timing meets intuition, where movement is felt rather than seen. The Sogdians survived because they listened. They vanished because, for the first time, the world moved faster than they could adapt. The lesson they leave behind is therefore simple, profound, and timeless. If you wish to shape your fortune, feel the vibration before others hear it. Do not wait for certainty. Certainty is the final stage of any trend. By the time the crowd understands, the advantage is gone. Wealth belongs not to those who move first, but to those who sense first.